These are U.S. citizens. They were not the target of any law enforcement investigation. Agents mom and her daughters, forced them outside in the rain in their underwear, tore apart their home, took their phones and their money, but they left them this. It's a 2-page inventory of what the agents say they took from their home. You can see there where it says U.S. currency. They don't say how much or anything, but that's the money that they took from this family. Now, what's interesting here is that at the top of this form, there's a space to write in which agency these federal agents were from. And what they wrote in there is HSI. So again, the FBI and the Marshal Service say that whatever those agents told that family when they broke in, the Marshal Service and the FBI were not represented there. Well, what's HSI? The agency that filled out this inventory of all the stuff that was taken from this family? HSI is Homeland Security Investigations, which is a very low profile but very large group of armed agents within the Department of Homeland Security. It is a large agency. They have thousands of agents. They are basically a huge federal armed force with no public profile. The Trump administration appears to be using them for all kinds of things. They don't seem to have a very clear remit. And like I said, the public mostly has never heard of them. Have you ever heard of this agency before, HSI? Do you, for example, know who's in charge of HSI? Who's the head of it? Do you know who you'd call if agents from HSI broke into your house, even though they concede they were looking for somebody else and not you, and you're not the target of any investigation? Well, we found out who, technically at least, is in charge of HSI, this acting executive associate director of Homeland Security Investigations. We have been trying assiduously to get in touch with him to try to get a comment on this story and on the reported behavior of these HSI agents in Oklahoma City. Specifically, we're trying to find out what exactly this Oklahoma City mom is supposed to do to get her money back and all of her family's stuff back, let alone to get her house repaired, after these federal agents broke through the doors and tore apart everything inside and terrorized this family, even though, again, they were not the targets of any investigation. They are U.S. citizens. HSI did not return any of our calls. Homeland Security, more broadly, is not addressing those questions from us either. We will keep trying. Also, you might remember this case of Mosen Madawi, which we've covered a few times on the show in the last few weeks. He's a university student who is a legal permanent resident. He has a green card. He turned up for his citizenship interview in Vermont, and masked federal agents swooped in on his citizenship interview and arrested him and took him away. We now know that the agents who arrested him at that citizenship interview were also HSI, were also this same armed division within Homeland Security. That detail, that it was HSI agents, was confirmed in a court document today, in a court ruling today, in which Mosen Madawi was set free. This young man lives in Vermont, even though he is a legal resident of the United States and has not been charged with any crime. He was worried that Trump was going to try to arrest him because of his participation in protests over the war in Gaza. His friends and his community in Vermont made a plan in advance to prepare for just such an emergency in case it came to pass. They'd set up a group text in advance so they could respond rapidly if Trump's agents came to arrest Mr. Madawi. When it in fact happened at his citizenship interview, his friends, his supporters in Vermont, they made sure he was not alone. They filmed his arrest. They notified the media. They notified his lawyers, who were able to act very, very quickly. And only because they were able to act so quickly were they able to get a judge to block the Trump administration from flying Mosen Madawi across the country to one of these black site immigration prisons in Louisiana. That judge's quick order kept Mr. Madawi in Vermont. Since then, Vermont U.S. Senator Peter Welch not only spoke out on his behalf, as did the other members of Vermont's congressional delegation, but Senator Welch also went to Colchester, Vermont, and visited him in the prison where he was being held. Vermonters turned up again and again and again, protesting on Mr. Madawi's behalf at the state capitol in Montpelier and at the prison where he was being held. And today they got him out. And that support for him among his community in Vermont was referenced again and again in the ruling today, setting him free. Let me just read you a little bit from that ruling. It's pretty remarkable. Quote, through counsel, Mr. Madawi filed a motion for release on April 22nd. That motion is supported by over 125 letters of support from professors, neighbors, fellow students, and others who know him well. All attest to his mild and peaceful nature, his deep intelligence, and his commitment to principles of nonviolence and political activism. Now, because the Trump administration accused Mosen Madawi of anti-Semitism for his criticism of the war in Gaza, the judge goes on in his ruling to note this. He says, quote, a striking number of these letters come from Jewish colleagues and professors involved in the study of the history and culture of Israel and Judaism. The judge's ruling continues, quote, non-citizen residents like Mr. Madawi enjoy First Amendment rights in this country to the same extent as U.S. citizens. The Supreme Court has never held that the First Amendment fails to protect non-citizens' political speech to the same extent it protects citizens' political speech. That includes the right to be free from retaliation for the exercise of First Amendment rights. The judge says, quote, people who know Mr. Madawi describe him as a peaceful figure who seeks consensus in a highly charged political environment. But even if he were a firebrand, his conduct is protected by the First Amendment. The judge says, quote, this court also considers the extraordinary setting of this case and others like it. Legal residents not charged with crimes or misconduct are being arrested and threatened with deportation for stating their views on the political issues of the day. The judge says, quote, our nation has seen times like this before, especially during the Red Scare and the Palmer raids of 1919 and 1920, which led to the deportation of hundreds of people suspected of anarchist or communist views. Similar themes were sounded during the McCarthy period in the 1950s, when thousands of non-citizens were targeted for deportation due to their political views. The judge, in his ruling, then cites a famous Supreme Court dissent that called out, quote, the menace to free institutions inherent in procedures of this pattern. The judge today says, quote, the wheel of history has come around again. But as before, these times of excess will pass. Quote, Mr. Madawi has strong ties to the Vermont community where he owns a home. He is a full-time student who has been accepted into a graduate program. He has deep connections to professors, his faith community, and, it would appear, a great many friends. Mr. Madawi's release is in the public interest. His continued detention would likely have a chilling effect on protected speech, which is squarely against the public interest. Continuing to detain him would not benefit the public in any way, as he appears to be neither a flight risk nor a danger to the community. Mr. Madawi's release will benefit his community, which appears to deeply cherish and value him. This court, therefore, declines to stay its order pending appeal and instead requires Mr. Madawi's immediate release. Whereupon his friends and neighbors who had packed the courtroom and held silent throughout the judge's ruling from the bench, they reportedly could not contain themselves anymore. And according to the New York Times reporter who was in the room, they burst into applause. And then Mosen Madawi was set free and walked out of the courthouse. So it is not an idle question, right? It is not a hypothetical question to ask, what are the plans in your town for when Trump's agents come and arrest somebody from your church or your school or your neighborhood, right? In the Mosen Madawi case, we've got this sort of case study. They would not be setting him free if Trump was able to spirit him away to Louisiana. They weren't able to spirit him away to Louisiana because they acted fast. And they were only able to act fast because they had planned in advance what they would do if, in fact, Trump's masked agents did come in and arrest this young man. In advance, they made a text chain. They made a network. They called lawyers. They made a plan. And now he's free. And this isn't the only time it has worked. You might remember at the beginning of this month, we saw it in Sackett's Harbor. Sackett's Harbor, New York. Do you remember this? This small town where a mom and her 3 kids were taken by Trump's immigration agents? And the school district where the kids were all in school, and the churches in that town, and the whole town of Sackett's Harbor, New York, they all came out to demand that those kids and their mom be released. This is a town where there aren't even 1,400 people. The population of this town is like 1,360 people. More than 1,000 people came out in that town and marched and protested to get that mom and her kids home. And they got them home. ICE released them. And people are doing things like this everywhere. Back in Vermont, where Mosen Madawi was just freed, these nuns from the Sisters of Mercy joining a protest to try to return 8 farm workers who were all arrested and taken away on a local dairy farm. You might have heard this weekend in the news about the big raid where they arrested more than 100 people at a nightclub in Colorado Springs. You heard about this weekend? Well, this was yesterday. People turning out at the El Paso County Sheriff's Office in Colorado Springs saying, let these people go. Yesterday, there was an ICE raid of some kind in Evansville, Illinois, where they arrested people. Well, people in Evansville were immediately out in the streets yesterday protesting. Local news in Evansville last night and today is full of news about the outrage in that community and the protests in response. Trump's so-called border czar, this guy Tom Homan, he paid a visit to give a speech in Rochester, New York yesterday. Tom Homan in Rochester, New York was greeted by not 1, not 2, but 3 different protests by angry Rochester residents. One in front of the public safety building in Rochester, one outside the club where Homan was speaking, and one on a highway overpass on his route into the city. Due process is overdue, Tom. Today in Washington, D.C., there was some peaceful civil disobedience, people blocking traffic this morning. They had a huge copy of the Constitution that they unfurled as a big banner. Their signs said things like, which will you choose, courage or compliance? That was the theme of this action today, courage or compliance. Torch fascism with the Statue of Liberty and her torch. They had a big globe with a sign in front of it, respect existence or expect resistance. This morning's action that we just showed you there, that comes on the heels of the big rally for fired federal workers that we saw at Union Station in Washington, D.C. yesterday. Last night, when Trump showed up in Warren, Michigan for his big, weird 100 days speech, he was greeted by a whole lot of people who wanted to give him a little piece of their mind. 100 days of BS. What's there to celebrate next to vets versus fascism? Make America grift-free again. You're fired, with a pretty good portrait of Trump there. Grifter in chief. Also this sign, you voted for democracy, not dictatorship. This one made me laugh. Put in by Putin. Fair enough. This was a fine shout out to the Queen, Sharon Jones. 100 days, 100 nights to know a man's heart. You know that song? Or in this case, 100 days, 100 nights to know a man has no heart. A lot of 100 days signs in Warren, Michigan, greeting the president last night. 100 days of incompetence, 100 days of cruelty, 100 days of chaos and loss, 100 days of destruction, 100 days of greed and evil, which spells out Doge, 100 days of Edvard Munch's The Scream, 100 days of lies, insults, cruelty, incompetence, corruption, betrayal. Celebrating 100 days of ineptitude and corruption. Yeah, Warren, Michigan says, hi, Mr. President, I dissent. That's what greeted him when he arrived in Warren, Michigan last night. We're expecting a lot of protests tomorrow, May 1st, also known as May Day, we expect hundreds of protests against Trump tomorrow all over the country. May Day, you may know, is also Law Day. And all over the country tomorrow, there are going to be stand up for the rule of law events. People saying, protect our courts, protect our rights, including one of these events we believe is going to happen on the steps of the United States Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. According to lawdayofaction.org, one of the things you're going to see at many of these stand up for the rule of law events tomorrow is lawyers publicly reaffirming the oath that lawyers take when they become a member of the bar. People essentially re-swearing their oath to support the Constitution of the United States. This first 100 days of this presidency have been, there's a lot of ways you could call it. A lot of people have been coming up with good science, but their own spin on it. I would say it's been a historic debacle. But I would also say that one of the most important things to know about that is that the country is very clearly wide awake to it, right? This is not a secret. Quote, Trump appears to be less popular at the 100-day mark than any other president since the inception of approval polling, says the Financial Times. Headline, Trump's approval at 100 days lower than any president in at least 7 decades. Headline, poll finds more Americans give Trump an F than any other grade for his first 100 days. They asked Americans to grade him. More Americans gave him an F than any other grade. Headline, new polls reveal Americans, including Republicans, losing faith in Trump. And you pile on top of that the economic judgment that is pouring in now in reaction to Trump's bizarre economic policy decisions. Donald Trump's first 100 days mark worst for U.S. stock market since Gerald Ford. U.S. stocks have underperformed the rest of the world this year by the widest margin in more than 3 decades, as Trump's erratic policymaking sparks an investor exodus from American assets. Quote, U.S. economy shrinks 0.3% in the first quarter as Trump trade wars disrupt businesses. U.S. economy shrank in early 2025 as Trump tariffs sapped growth. I mean, it's bad. I would say it's an historic debacle. But, you know, it's not over yet. We're only 100 days in. How's he handling this bad news? How are his political skills at this moment for handling a political moment like this? Well, here's another headline for you from today. Headline, Trump on tariffs says, quote, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30. He really did say this on camera at the White House. I'll spare you the tape. I'll tell you, though, his exact quote was, well, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls, you know? And maybe the 2 dolls will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. So that's a little snapshot of the president's political skills right now. That's his political instincts, his ability to know just the right thing to say in a difficult moment. That's how sharp he is at this point in his life. He is handling the disastrous American public opinion polling and his performance thus far, and the self-imposed total self-immolation of the U.S. economy by telling America's children, you know what? You have too many toys anyway. Suck it up, kids. Also, buy my crypto coin. You can maybe tie it all up in a bow with this new polling from the Public Religion Research Institute. Axios got the first look at this polling, and I think their headline on it sums it up well. Quote, most Americans see Trump as a, quote, dangerous dictator. And that's exactly what that poll found. I mean, the exact phrase that was put to people in this large, well-respected poll was, President Trump is a dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys American democracy. Do you agree? The answer was yes, by 8 points. Yes, a majority of Americans agree with that. 52% of the country agrees with that. Break it down along racial lines, 67% of Black Americans agree that Donald Trump is a dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys American democracy. 67% of Black Americans. Latino Americans, 63%. Asian American or Pacific Islander, 58%. It's only white people, among whom a majority do not agree with that statement, but even among white people, it's still 45%. A dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys American democracy. Speaking of Trump's power being limited, court losses keep piling up for him. Trump is now being forced by the courts to reinstate the more than 1,400 people he tried to fire from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Trump has also just been ordered to pay Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty the $12 million in grant funding they were owed in April, according to their congressional appropriation, that Trump nevertheless was refusing to pay out. And that ruling is important in its own terms. But in that ruling, you should know, there was sort of an important statement that went along with it. Language in the ruling from the judge in this case, who is a very conservative 81-year-old Ronald Reagan-appointed judge in Washington. He closed his ruling in this case by noting that the constitutional paradigm that mandates that Trump can't block this funding that was approved by Congress, that constitutional paradigm, in the judge's words, is, quote, a framework that has propelled the United States to heights of greatness, liberty, and prosperity unparalleled in the history of the world for nearly 250 years. If our nation is to thrive for another 250 years, each co-equal branch of government must be willing to courageously exert the authority entrusted to it by our founders. Judge Royce Lamberth, deeply, deeply conservative veteran judge in the Federal District Court yesterday in Washington. What a time, right? I mean, this is the end of the 100 days. This is the start of the second 100 days. And here's Donald Trump, less popular than any president has been at this point in his presidency since the dawn of modern polling. He's like blaming Joe Biden for everything he's doing. He's complaining that the polls must be fake, all of them. He's telling America's kids that, you know what, they've had it too good and that's about to change. While meanwhile, the courts are finding their voice, and the people never lost theirs in the first place. Second 100 days. The country seems like we're ready. Tonight, we're just getting started. Lots to come tonight. Stay with us. Here for shows every night. That I wanted to spend these last few shows talking about some of what is around the corner for Trump's second 100 days and beyond. Some new threats in what Trump is doing that the country, I think, hasn't really focused on yet, but I think this is stuff that's on its way. On Monday night, we talked about the first thing I really wanted to raise a flag on, which is this military zone Trump has created on the border where active duty U.S. troops have been given legal authorization to arrest U.S. citizens and search U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. That is not something the American military is supposed to do. Second thing we talked about last night, which is all of these immigration-related powers being turned against U.S. citizens, agents smashing up the house of a U.S. citizen and her daughters in Oklahoma City, U.S. citizens getting letters from the government telling them to leave the country, U.S. citizens being arrested and held in immigration prisons, U.S. citizen children being sent out of the country. This is something that is already happening here. This is not a slippery slope to worry about in the future. It's already happening. But here's the third thing I wanted to raise. It's something that we sort of just, I think, haven't really gotten our heads around it yet. And it relates to Doge and Elon Musk and what he's done in Washington. But it's the sort of black box at the center of whatever he has been doing in Washington. We know that Doge is not about saving money, because even the amount of money that they claim to have saved, it's barely more than the amount of money they are thought to have wasted with the way they have behaved in Washington. There's been a ton of embarrassing and really indefensible mistakes that Musk and the Doge team have made. But those mistakes, no matter how much publicity they get and how often they need to be reversed, it hasn't led them to stop making those mistakes. They haven't course corrected on any of that. So it seems like maybe they're not even viewing those things as mistakes. The one thing they are consistently doing, and doing as aggressively as possible, and they haven't given us an explanation for why they're doing it, is that they are aggregating data. It is a huge data grab from what appears to be every agency in the government. And that really appears to be their only consistent priority, the only thing they are consistently and aggressively doing everywhere they insert themselves. What is that about? Why are they doing that? This is from investigative journalist Julia Engwin, who has reported on data privacy and security for years. She's writing in the New York Times today. She says, quote, Doge is assembling a sprawling domestic surveillance system for the Trump administration, the likes of which we have never seen in the United States. Over the past 100 days, Doge teams have grabbed personal data about U.S. residents from dozens of federal databases and are reportedly merging it all into a master database. This month, House Democratic lawmakers reported that a whistleblower had come forward to reveal that the master database will combine data from federal agencies, including Social Security, the IRS, and the Department of Health and Human Services. The whistleblower also alleged that Doge workers are filling backpacks with multiple laptops, each one loaded with purloined agency data. What this amounts to is a stunningly fast reversal of our long history of siloing government data to prevent its misuse. In their first 100 days, Musk and Trump have knocked down the barriers that were intended to prevent them from creating dossiers on every U.S. resident. Now they seem to be building a defining feature of many authoritarian regimes, comprehensive files on everyone, so they can punish those who protest. A longtime civil liberties lawyer tells Ms. Engwin for the Times today, quote, this is what we were always scared of. The infrastructure for turnkey totalitarianism is there for an administration willing to break the law. Joining us now is Julia Engwin. She's founder of Proof News. She's the author of Dragnet Nation, A Quest for Privacy, Security, and Freedom in a World of Relentless Surveillance. Ms. Engwin, I really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So I think that your op-ed is really helpful. I'm not any more tech savvy than the average bear, but I have found myself increasingly worried about what we don't know about why Doge is assembling data the way they are and what they are planning to do with it. For an audience that may not be totally familiar with surveillance technology and the kind of privacy protections that you're so well versed in, can you explain in just layman's terms what you're most worried about here?
Well, what I'm worried about is the fact that the federal government has incredibly sensitive data about us, and we never really think about it, right? We send in our IRS returns, and that every penny we've spent and everything we've earned. We file an unemployment claim benefit. We get a Social Security check, and all those things are separate, and we deal with separate agencies, and never before has the government contemplated putting them all in one place. But that's what Doge is doing. And the thing is that the reason that governments want to do that usually is they want to build these comprehensive dossiers on people. So essentially, the thing that authoritarians really like is they want to be able to say with a snap of a finger, I don't like this person, let's find something on him. And if they have to go to 6, 10 agencies to figure out that thing, that's hard. They want it all in one place. So they want to be able to just get something on you. China is sort of the example that does this. They have these master files that they have on every citizen that are everything that they've ever done. It's called social credit scores. They have, and they use it to punish dissent. And I'm very worried that that's where we're going. We have a president who's been really outspoken about he wants revenge on his political enemies, and we have somebody collecting data about everyone so that he can go after his enemies.
You write really, I think, articulately and clearly about the privacy laws and the sort of inherent safety structures that are built into siloing data the way that you're describing, so it can't be easily combined. But if the type of one-stop shopping master database is being compiled here, is U.S. privacy law powerless against it? I mean, could legal action force the dismantling of something like that, or would it effectively be beyond the law?
Well, our privacy law is really not up to the task. First of all, we are one of the only nations that doesn't have a comprehensive privacy law that protects, basically sets a minimum baseline for all data usage. Every other country has one. And almost every other country has a data protection authority that's an agency tasked specifically with protecting data. So we're already behind. But then if you look at the law that specifically applies to the federal government data, the Federal Privacy Act, it was passed in 1974 basically under a thought that, like, you would have good faith actors who would be making sort of maybe a mistake with data, but not acting malevolently. So there's really no fines. I mean, minimum fines. There's very little remedies. Basically, the remedy is you go to the court and say, they took my data, they were wrong, I want it corrected. Sort of like the idea was more like correcting your credit score or getting your name changed. And so there isn't a lot that the judges have to work with when they are using, they know that this law applies, but there's not a lot that they can do to stop other than saying make sure that the data is correct or that you publish a notice in the Federal Register saying you're going to use the data for this purpose, both of which are not really adequate remedies for the creation of dossier files about every citizen, the likes of which we have never seen.
Yeah, which just highlights the need to have a political response to this that creates a political cost for those who are trying to do it. First step toward that is understanding what they're doing, and I think your work on this has really helped me at least understand what the threats are and what the parameters of this are. So, Julia Engwin, investigative journalist, thank you so much for your writing on this, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
All right, much more news ahead here tonight. Stay with us. About to show you a remarkable photograph. This was taken today by Reuters. It's aerial footage taken by drone, and it shows men, prisoners. Excuse me, this is Monday. It shows men, prisoners who are being held at the Bluebonnet Immigration Prison in Anson, Texas. They're out on the yard at the facility, and the prisoners know that the drone is there. You see them waving to the drone, making sure that they're being seen. They are signaling to the drone, signaling for help, using their bodies to spell out SOS. These men may be among the many people the Trump administration is trying to send to a prison in El Salvador with little to no due process and no way to get before a judge, to get out, to ever get back home. The Bluebonnet Immigration Prison in Anson, Texas, where these men are, that's the same one where the Trump administration earlier this month told 50 of these men they would be shipped out of the country imminently. Buses full of men were already on the road, presumably headed for the airport, with huge numbers of law enforcement cars in escort. But the ACLU got a last-minute emergency order from the court. It blocked the administration from sending those prisoners away. The buses and their law enforcement convoy escort passed the airport exit, turned around, and came back to that facility in Anson, Texas. For weeks now, the whole country has been watching the high-stakes court battle over prisoners like these, and specifically over the fate of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, whose lawyers deny that he is a member of a Salvadoran gang called MS-13, which is what the Trump administration alleges against him. The Trump administration has variously said they sent him away by mistake and also not by mistake. The district court judge in that case and the Supreme Court have ordered the Trump administration that they must facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's return to the U.S. The district court judge has been demanding that the Trump administration tell her what, if anything, they've been doing to get the guy back. Last week, in a somewhat mysterious turn in that case, both the Trump administration's lawyers and lawyers for Kilmar Abrego Garcia, they agreed that they would essentially put the issue aside for about a week. They would delay any further proceedings by mutual agreement for about a week. And given how fast-paced this court case has been going, it was a little bit strange when they made that decision. At the time, we didn't know why both sides in the case would agree to that pause. Well, now tonight we do. Because tonight, Kilmar Abrego Garcia's lawyer has told MSNBC the reason for that week-long pause was because the Trump administration said it would, quote, take steps to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to the United States. That is why his lawyers agreed to the pause. And that, of course, is a big deal. The Trump administration has been saying publicly they don't have the legal authority to bring this guy back. Now his attorney says Trump administration lawyers told the judge, actually, they are working to get him back. They just needed a few days to get it done. Well, a week later, nothing seems to have happened. The lawyer for Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia telling us, quote, it remains unclear what, if anything, the government has done in the past 7 days to bring our client home to his family. And all of this comes, of course, as the president himself told ABC News last night that he could get Mr. Abrego Garcia back if he wanted to. He just doesn't want to. It'll be interesting to see how that lands in court. Throughout these many immigration cases, protesters and lawmakers have kept the pressure up by showing up. But it has been judges who have been holding the line, and it has been lawyers who have been rushing these cases into court in the most dire of circumstances. One of the lawyers leading that fight has been the ACLU's Lee Gallant. He joins us next. Stay with us.